right, welcome back to the Christian Music Industry Podcast, and I'm your host, Wisdom Moon, and today I have a special treat, which is two guests, and two amazing guests, Charlie Peacock and his wife, Andi Ashworth. Welcome, guys. Thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Yeah, we're so glad to see you. Good to be here.
Thank you for having us.
And congrats on the new book, Why Everything That Doesn't Matter Matters So Much.
Thank
you.
I always just admire people that write books because I know how much work it is.
Yeah, it's hard.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would love to first hear about what transpired this book. Why did you feel like we should write this book and spend, X number of months like writing this?
Yeah, I think we were both we're at a stage of life where we've lived a lot of story and had some time to do some reflecting at this point. And we were, have been writers for a long time, both of us. So we've always been writing our way through life all along. Even when we were very young and we first met each other, we were just, beginning to understand what it meant to have that writing thing inside of us, and just needed to write about things in order to know and
process the world.
Process the world and our experience. And so that has stayed in us and grown all of our life together. And so I think this book is really has been born out of that place of, just taking stories and reflection and then turning them outward into what we have ended up with is a collection of letters to the reader.
To the reader, the listener.
To the listener, that really talk about many things. And everything from music and music making to the role of the artists in the world to cooking and the creativity and the service of that. And we talk a lot about place and the creation of place, and we talk
marriage,
marriage,
sickness and suffering. Sort of the whole range of human activity and thinking and feeling. And this is, we've both written books and written many essays and contributed to a lot of different books and periodicals and whatnot. And so we've written on many of these subjects before in essay form, but as Andi said, the letter form is different. And as soon as, with the help of our editor, we landed on that decision to go in that direction. As you know, from reading the scripture and particularly Paul's letters, it really sort of focuses you on the audience. And so it really helped me to try to write more like I was addressing friends sitting in our living room, it was a great help to have that focus. And I also think it made the book, has made the book overall more invitational, kind of user-friendly than it would have been had we sort of been more sort of left to our normal way of writing. Although I will say, in deference to Andi and in fairness to her, she has really one beautiful writing voice, and I tend to have two. I kind of have my artist casual voice, and then I have an academic voice too. So I tried to put the academic voice aside and just and make it so that it was really, again, like you're sitting in the living room. living room with us.
That's awesome, man. And I would imagine sometimes it could be hard to write a book as a couple. And if you know, maybe disagree on something or whatever. But I mean, I think what really is really special about what you guys have done is that you, like you said, you guys have lived a lot of life together. And you've done, a lot of cool things. And I think I mean, my first name is Wisdom, but
Which I love. Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
And I love that you guys are imparting wisdom to people,
Mhm.
and just I've always thought that, because especially in the Korean culture, like you really are taught to respect your elders and
Mhm.
glean from your elders, and
Mhm.
Yeah.
like really there's a lot of value put on elders because they've lived so much life,
Yeah.
and in our American culture that's not always the case.
Mhm.
And I think that's such an important thing that even as Christians, like we should lean into more, is like, how do we glean from folks that are way ahead of us before
Mhm.
it's too late to do that. And I love that you guys put it in a book form, so that it's like here to stay.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. I'd be interested to hear because you've been involved in Christian music, interested to hear your take on that because, um, Christian music, the seedbed of Christian music is really music created for young people. And that was really the reason that it came to be in the first place. Um, and as an alternative music to the music of the world, so to speak. And but with that model, even though I will say it has matured and grown, and it's common now to find artists that are in their 40s,
Mm.
maybe even in their 50s, that are still active in Christian music. 20 years ago, that would not have been the case.
Yeah.
And of course, that part of that is accommodation for the people who sort of became Christian music's, superstars like an Amy Grant or Michael W. Smith or Stephen Curtis, people like that. As they aged, the question was there still a place for them?
Mm.
And so, given what you said about the maturity and wisdom aspect, do you ever wonder why it is that we as Christians don't take that more seriously in terms of the music that we listen to and promote?
Mm. Wow, that's a that's a deep question, man. Uh,
Because we tend to be more, unless it's a big name and person who's drawing a lot of people, we tend to sort of, once you reach an age ceiling, it's kind of like, all right, well, we'll see you later.
yeah,
We're
yeah,
done with you. You don't relate to youth enough anymore, or whatever it might be.
yeah.
Whereas for us, we're always looking for artists that have a mature, experienced voice, not just lyrically, but musically. We want to
Mm,
have that richness of life led, and
yeah.
we want to hear that in the music. I mean, you heard that. Did you watch the Grammys the other night?
No, I did not.
Oh, there was an amazing performance by Joni Mitchell, who's 80,
Oh,
which
wow.
was really, to me, the most remarkable performance on the entire,
Wow,
Grammys broadcast.
man, that's amazing. Yeah, I I wonder if like part of it is our culture, just like devaluing, people
Mhm.
after a certain, like basically, people say that you age out of the music industry.
Right.
And I'm sure part of it too, especially for younger people, is the sonically, maybe it sounds outdated to them
Sure. Sure.
compared to like what they hear on mainstream playlists or radio.
Right.
So yeah, that would be my thought, at least right now.
Yeah,
But
yeah, functionally, I totally agree. I just wonder if there isn't something about our calling as Christians that we would make space to sort of override those commercial,
yeah,
um, popular music considerations in favor of having, a wisdom culture.
yeah, Yeah, I think you have something there.
I might be onto something.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
And tied to that conversation, in the book, you mentioned that you don't like to be called a Christian musician.
that's correct.
And I struggle with, yeah, the terminology of like Christian artists. Like I kind of have a love and hate relationship with it
Yeah.
because it's like an easy way to distinguish, what you're
Mhm.
talking about, like the type of artist, but at the same time, you're kind of pigeonholing somebody
Yeah.
to quote unquote Christian music,
Yeah.
and it almost makes it so that you can only really cater your music to
Right.
Christians.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm curious why you approach it that way.
Yeah. I think it's just something that I learned pretty quickly on through experience, that if I wanted to be faithful to God in my calling through music, that and this is just for me, I'm speaking for me, not for anyone else. But for me, I was pretty confident that I was going to be involved in the creation of lots of different kinds of music for lots of different kinds of reasons for lots of different people. And so, because of that, I did not want to be pigeonholed, as you said, using your word, and sort of boxed into a genre.
Mm,
If you were saying, hey, all genres aside, and just in terms of artistry and your allegiance to Christ, would you call yourself a Christian musician? I'd say absolutely.
mm,
But we're not going to, most people aren't talking about that. Most people are talking about Christian music and Christian musician, right? And
mm,
all of that being tied together. So that's why I'm careful with that, because I know that if I say I'm a Christian musician, 99% of the time, the listener is going to believe or think that I'm solely involved in the genre of Christian music,
yeah.
which I'm not. So therefore, that wouldn't be truthful, would it? So
Mm,
that's a part of it, is being accurate and truthful and sensitive to my listeners. And so there's not any part of it that is like, oh, I don't want to have anything to do with that. I'm it's not, because, as you know, I've created a lot of what was known as contemporary Christian music, particularly between, say, 1989 and the year 2000, or a little bit beyond. So yeah, over 10 years. I mean, there's a big block of 50 or 60 albums that I wrote and produced that are definitely people consider to be in that genre. Not everyone that I worked with or produced considers themselves to be in that genre, but
mm,
nevertheless, they had something to do with it. And so I'm happy to have been a part of that. I love the people. I love the history that I've been able to participate in. But I'm also, I make a lot of jazz music, which was
mm.
my first love. I've was a part of the, Americana folk boom here in Nashville that brought out so many great artists, included really the stellar duo, the Civil Wars, that
Oh
I
yeah.
worked with and produced. So I have a lot of interests, including neoclassical music, which I write and produce,
Mm,
and even in those terms, I mean, I'm using genre terms. I'm just saying that, like, look, I might want to be involved in a bunch of different genres, and so don't pigeonhole me, because it's all about faithfulness to me. That's what
yes.
it's about. It's all about faithfulness.
Yeah. Once, maybe last year, somebody asked me, like, how do you measure success as an artist or somebody in the industry? And I said, for me, being a Christ follower, doing this, faithfulness is success. Like
Mhm.
success is defined as like faithfulness. So I love what he
Absolutely.
said. Yeah.
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 So Andy, I want to throw a question at you. So the main message of this book is really about how our actions have a big impact on the world around us and how we can live out our faith in our culture. And obviously, there's a lot happening in our culture. I'm sure you guys have seen so much, just uh, throughout your life? Like even technologically, there's been a lot of changes,
Yeah,
and
entire
yeah,
world change, yeah.
there's been just even a lot of tension, within our culture. So how do we, from your perspective, how do we live as Christians, as people that are in this culture but not of the culture?
Okay. Good question. I think I always go back to the very essential, central thing to me that I see in the scriptures and that I have experienced in my life, and that is to be a hospitable person
Mm,
as you go about your life. And that has 1,000 different looks.
mm,
It's not one thing. It's many, many things. It's everything from just being a curious, kind person in your neighborhood, uh, to
mm,
being, maybe somebody who likes to gather people in their home. Perhaps you you just have, maybe a Trader Joe's uh, mac and cheese.
mm,
You might have an extra one, and you might want to share that with somebody who lives near you. Or you're in the grocery store or out in the public, or you get into a conversation somewhere, and you're curious about people. You want to know their stories.
mm,
You want to share your own. You want to listen. You don't want to shut people down. Or, I think that it's always been really, really important, but I think it's really, really important
mm,
in the times in which we're living. And just with the life, we had a very open home called the Art House in Nashville that we lived in for about 24 years, I think.
wow,
And so it was very radically open home, and we had people in and out all the time. And so that was sometimes for larger events, but often for just something small, like, a conversation in front of the fire
mm,
with somebody. And I found that often that was exactly where I needed to be in that moment, was to just know that 1 or 2 or 3 hour conversation with one person was what was needed and what I could give and what I was being called to. And and I had to know that mattered. And increasingly, I really did understand that and could give myself to that. So
mm,
those are just some of the things. But I think it always comes down to, for me, loving your neighbor and loving God. It has to have it has to have a personal,
Touch.
a touch as to what that means. That it's not just this general thing we actually live out in our time, in our places, in our cities, in our neighborhoods. So,
yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and as I'm getting older, I like really realized, man, like in order to be hospitable and like do what God's called you to do, like health has such a big impact in it. Because if you're not healthy physically, then or even mentally, you're
mhm,
not really able to do those things.
That's
yeah.
right.
So, have you guys experienced a time in your life where you've had kind of a health crisis and you've had to kind of almost force yourself to slow down, whether it was like self-care or therapy, and how did that kind of play out in your life?
Yeah, we both have.
Definitely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
both have. You want me to
Yeah,
go
you go ahead.
first? Yeah, I mean, wisdom. I'm right in the midst of one now
Mm,
that's been going on for 7 years,
wow.
and so yeah, I'm always having to moderate my activity and stress level because of a neurological disorder. So Yeah, I'm very familiar with that. You know,
Mm,
I live with a 24/7 headache, have for 7+ years,
wow.
and so yeah. Um, I used to be someone who, you know, I I say this with shame and regret, but just someone who was just like, you know, pulling people along with me and saying, look, you know, if you can't keep up, you know, then maybe you're not in the right place, you
Mm,
know. And I really have that attitude about life,
mm,
and you know, I've had to just really um, let God change that part of me,
mm,
and see that was a real brokenness that led to even more brokenness, not just for myself in my disorder, but for those I love. And so, yeah, stopping and just saying, okay, well, I guess I can't do that, or I shouldn't do that, or
mm.
it's time to take a nap, or it's time to go for a walk, or do some form, as you said, self-care. Yeah, that's a major part of our life now. I mean,
Yeah.
that it is part of who we are. We're not people anymore who are just sort of like pull yourself up by your bootstraps and get it done. And you know, I mean, I think we're both hard workers, so it's difficult to take that out of us. I'm
Mm,
not sure that we want to, but on the other hand, we really value rest, and just having that's what I would call Sabbath knowledge
mm,
about your dependence on God, and that you can stop at any time during the week, that Sabbath can occur, that you can say, it seems like I really need to keep working, like I really need to do this, or the world is going to end. But part of being a Christian and practicing Sabbath rest is saying that no, I depend on God and God alone, and not this particular day or this particular work, or it
mm,
being finished, or meeting this deadline, or what people think about me, and all of that.
yeah.
Now, I'm making that sound too simple, because those are all really hard things to overcome.
Yeah.
But I would say that we both, in different ways, very very different ways for our personalities, but
Mm,
we both are in that stage of life.
yeah. Andy, do you want to add to that?
Just to say, yeah, I just agree with absolutely everything, and I'll just put a little tail on the end that approximate is a word that we use a lot,
Mm,
which um, we we've learned a lot about that word from our very wonderful author friend Stephen Garber.
mm,
But it's that word that, you know, you're in motion, but you're never getting there perfectly. And I would say that at this stage, even as much as we have learned, as much as we have gone through, we still have to remind each other, even now as we're promoting a book, you know, that we're not going to get it all done in one day. You know,
yeah.
it is time to stop. It is time to eat a good dinner and uh, take some breaks and watch a TV show or read a book, or,
Yeah.
you know, go for a walk, be with our family, whatever it is. But as Charlie said, it's the dependence and the faithfulness, but
Mm,
not perfection, not ever.
yeah.
So always being, you know, in movement, in motion towards that, but never arriving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's such a hard thing to figure out. And
Mhm.
because I lean more towards like working and working and working,
Yeah.
and feeling like there's never an end, but like really trying to figure out, okay, how do I actually abide in Christ
Yeah.
Mhm.
and like depend on him and realize like I I'm not supposed to depend on myself and like God's got this, but then at the same time, we are called to be good stewards of our time and resources. So yeah, I love what you guys shared about that.
You have to, I mean, if you're following Christ, you've signed up to live in that tension. And it's not going to be resolved in this life. But it can ebb and flow. And as long as, like as Andi said, if you can put that word proximate in your vocabulary, then you can just say, like, there just is no perfect. There is only proximate. I almost get there. Almost, people would always ask me, like, well, have you ever done a perfect record? And I say, absolutely not. Like, well, how did you know? And I say, because it was just time to turn the record in. It had to be done. That's when I knew it was done. It didn't mean it was perfect. It was just done.
Yeah.
It was proximate. It was the best that we could do, given the resources and the time and the talent that we had. And it was time to move on to the next one.
Yeah. And related to that, why would you say it's important to think deeply about our vocation?
Well, we love talking about vocation because we feel that that's really at the heart of our life here on earth, is that we're called to the vocation of loving God and serving God as caregivers, caretakers of all that Jesus loves. And the width and depth of all that Jesus loves is massive. And it takes all of humanity who have started to follow after Jesus to even make a dent in what it means to love all of that.
Yeah.
And of course it is the people around you. It is your neighbor. I mean, that's why Jesus was so specific about that. But it's also all of creation. And so the vocational work that's available to every human being is also massive. So that means that we can be involved in caring for a golf course. We can be involved in caring for music. We can steward a podcast. We can be someone who helps develop new medicines for what ails us. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on. It also involves citizen making. I mean, it goes right down to our children and our grandchildren and those that we help to grow in the world, and how we, what direction we point them in, how we recognize their gifts and talents, and then resource them so that they grow up to be good citizens who repeat this pattern of loving God and loving neighbor and caring for creation.
Yeah.
And that's how we see vocation. We see it as it is a calling. There is one who calls, and the one who calls is God. And we know that specifically through Jesus. And we find out the specifics of the calling by following Jesus and by observing creation and seeing where the work needs to be done. I mean, all you have to do is walk outside your front door and you can see what needs to be cared for, right?
Yeah.
And that's the work of vocation. That's the vocational life. Each of us have different areas of emphasis, but we know what it is that we care for. So one of the encouragements that we give through the book is for the readers and listeners to be able to give an inventory of the things that they care for. Right. So we would both say that we care for writing in the world. So we're both writers. We care for that. Andi has specific kinds of care that she does. I have those that I do and am known for, and that might be, specifically music, art making. It might be about being an apologist for faith and art, and various other things. And then what would you say for yourself?
Oh, I would say, let's see, everything from the relational aspect of life,
Yeah, 'cause that's
which
vocation
is
too.
huge.
Yeah.
Vocation of a mother, a wife, a grandmother, a friend, and then I'm a gardener. God has made me a gardener. God has made me a writer. God has made me a cook, a person who can feed and keep us going, but also has historically fed a lot of different people. Actual food to nourish their bodies, but given them tables at which to know each other as well. So, yeah, it's it's a big idea.
Yeah. I'm thankful for people that can cook because I'm a great eater. So
Me too.
Good for you.
Yeah, but I love what you guys shared because my wife is actually a stay-at-home mom, and our oldest is 18 now, like about to go on his own, live on his own. And like we've had those conversations a lot to go like, what happens like at once all the kids leave, like what do you do with your time? And also feeling like, man, I because I've had like jobs where I was traveling and getting to work with artists and things like that, like I got to do quote unquote a lot of cool things. Whereas, she's been home mostly changing a lot of diapers, having a lot of talks with, our kids and homeschooling them and things like that. So I love what you shared that that's a calling and that's a vocation and that's so important too. So
absolutely.
Yeah. I mean,
that's literally life-giving work.
Yeah.
Your wife has been.
That's the citizen making. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we would just, this is what the whole title of the book is about. There's many people who are doing great work in a very quiet corner, of life.
Yeah.
It's not getting, like you say, it's not the cool things. It's not getting any press. No one's giving them a trophy for it. And we just want readers and listeners to know that that work that you're doing is not a small work. It's a big work. Every work of caring for everything that Jesus loves is equally important. And we really want people to know that when people tell you things don't matter that much, you just tell them, no, everything matters. Everything matters so much.
Yeah.
There's no neutrality in this life. It's like they may be small in terms of it could be an increment of time, right? Or a small group of people, but they're never small in impact because they add to this great, huge, massive collection of impact that's happening every moment all around the world.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I heard this thing with parenting, how the days are long, but the years are short. It just flies by. But the, day to day, like it adds up and it matters, what you do day to day. So, yeah. So as I wrap up, I do want to ask you one question that actually doesn't have anything to do with this book necessarily, but I would definitely encourage you as you're listening to check out the book, Why Everything That Doesn't Matter Matters So Much. And I feel like I can just sit here and like hear you guys talk for hours.
Oh, that's very kind of you. Wisdom.
Yeah, but I won't hold you hostage to to this podcast because I'm sure you guys have a lot of interviews to do. But Charlie, I've been enjoying your podcast, Music and Meaning.
Yes.
It popped up one day on Instagram ads, and I was like, well, Charlie Peacock has a podcast. So I immediately subscribed and like started following you, and like it's really refreshing, like the way you do the podcast. So I just wanted to thank you for starting that podcast. And one last question I guess I had was like, what do you find rewarding about doing your podcast?
Yeah, I really like the work of the podcast, and in terms of the creating part, imagining creating it, is because I think it at this time of life, it plays to a lot of my interests and strengths.
Mm.
Obviously the music production part of it and putting the podcast together. And for those who haven't listened to it, and maybe you could even add something to this, Wisdom, but it's pretty cinematic.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a soundtrack to the whole thing. And there are guest voices that come in and out. And so it's in podcast land, I think, would you say it's pretty highly produced then?
Oh yeah. I would actually call it an experience. Like you're experiencing it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay,
that's
good.
great.
Well, that's what I hope for. So that's me, taking all of that experience of being a music producer for so long, but also being a writer, as I write all the scripts, and then I work with the producer, Mike Cosper, and sometimes he'll do some writing, he'll tweak. He's a great producer, he's really taught me a lot in just a very short amount of time. And then I have other associate producers, and then I have a co-composer that I work with as well. So I have a pretty substantive team. I have a mix engineer,
Wow.
So I'm fortunate that CT Media has equipped me with a team to really do this in the way that I imagine doing it.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Right.
I love, dreaming up the stories and investigating them and researching. Because we both love researching. We just like we said in the beginning, we write because we love it, but we also write to discover who we are and what we know and why we know it. You know? And so much of music and meaning really is about answering those questions in the context of music.
Yeah, man, that's so good. So if you are not subscribed to that podcast, be sure to go do it right now because you're missing out.
Yeah, music and meaning.
Yes. So Charlie and Andi, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the podcast. There's so much more, obviously, than what we talked about. So if you're listening, definitely go check out the book, check out Charlie's podcast. But yeah, thank you guys so much.
Thanks
for being
Wisdom.
such a great host.
You were a great host.
Yeah.
I loved it.
Yeah.